Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History for Relaxing. Tonight we step into a castle in deep winter, the kind of place where the stone looks permanently annoyed and every corridor feels like it was designed by someone who hates ankles. You're standing in torchlight that barely warms your eyelashes, listening to the building creak like a ship at sea. Your breath shows up immediately, not because you're being dramatic, but because the air is genuinely that cold. And here is your cheerful reality check. If you lie down on this flagstone hallway like it is a cozy hotel carpet, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and your local time so I can picture where you are listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pad forward and instantly understand the first rule of winter in a castle. The enemy is not just cold, it is moving cold. Drafts slip through gaps in doors, under shutters, and down stairwells like invisible thieves. The hallway is long, straight, and smug about it, offering the wind a perfect lane to sprint. You can feel the air brushing your cheeks, then your neck, then curling under your collar as if it has a personal grudge. The stone under your feet is worse. Stone does not feel cold, it steals heat from you. You could be wearing boots and still sense the chill climbing, slowly and patiently, like it has all night. You look up at the high ceiling and you realise the second rule, heat rises, and you're not allowed to rise with it. Any warmth that exists drifts upward to the rafters, where it hangs uselessly above your head like a rich person's perfume. Down here, at servant height, the air stays heavy and damp if there is a great hall nearby. You might see the last glow of a central hearth, but even that is a tease. A fire in a huge room is like lighting a candle in a gymnasium. It makes you feel hopeful for 5 seconds, then reality taps you on the shoulder. And yet, people do sleep in these places. Not because they enjoy it, but because the castle runs on human bodies the way a mill runs on water. Someone has to be awake for the gate, the horses, the kitchen embers, the lord's midnight whim, the baby who starts crying, the visitor who arrives late, the roof that decides to leak. A mainstream fact that hits hard is that in many medieval households, especially earlier on, the Great Hall is the centre of life. And a lot of lower status staff spend their nights on simple pallets in or near that communal space. Privacy is a luxury. Warmth is also a luxury. You do not get your own room because you are not considered a person with needs. You are considered a person with duties. So how do you keep from freezing to death in a hallway that feels like a stone refrigerator? You start by treating the building like a map of tiny climates. You do not pick a spot at random. You hunt for places where the castle accidentally gives you a gift. Inner walls can be slightly less punishing than outer walls because the wind is not licking the other side. Doorways are bad because every opening is a bellows. Stair bottoms can be bad too because cold air pools low, and stairwells act like chimneys for drafts. You learn to feel the air with the back of your hand like a human weather vane. If it brushes your skin steadily, you move. If it eddies and quiets, you consider staying. You also watch the light and listen. Torches and lamps do not heat much, but they tell you where people were recently, where a passage is used, where a door will open at dawn. If you bed down where boots stomp all morning, you will get stepped on like you are part of the floor plan. Servants learn the quiet lanes, the forgotten corners, the places behind a chest or under a stair where the airflow breaks. It is not romantic, it is tactical. You're basically playing stealth mode. Except the monster is hypothermia and the prize is waking up with toes you can still wiggle. Another truth is that you rarely sleep directly on bare stone if you can help it. That is not just comfort, it is survival. Even a thin layer between you and the floor slows heat loss. In some castles, floors are strewn with rushes, and those rushes are not there just to look rustic. They add a bit of insulation and help absorb damp. People also use straw, old cloth, and whatever scraps exist. You do not need a feather bed to live. You need air pockets trapped in fibrous stuff. That is the whole secret of warmth. Really, trap still air near your body and you buy yourself hours Then there is the castle's schedule of heat, which is basically a countdown timer. Fires are tended, then banked, then allowed to sink into embers. In a working household, embers are precious, because striking a new fire from scratch is a pain and can be expensive if you waste fuel. So someone is always thinking about tomorrow's flame. This matters for your sleep because the best time to lie down is not whenever you are tired. The best time is when the stones nearby have absorbed the last of the day's warmth. You position yourself like a cat that pretends it is not seeking heat. You're always seeking heat. You're just doing it discreetly, because nobody wants to hear you complain when they also are cold. You also carry beliefs, not just blankets. Here is a quirky tidbit that sounds silly until you are the one shivering. Many people fear night air and drafts as causes of sickness. They talk about bad air, miasma, the idea that certain currents bring illness. So a servant might tuck their head away, cover their mouth, or sleep angled away from a doorway not only for warmth, but because they think the draft itself is unhealthy. They might tuck herbs among bedding, not as perfume, but as protection. Even if the herb does nothing, the act of doing something feels like control, and control is warm in its own way. Of course, not every castle runs the same. Historians still argue whether most servants truly slept scattered in halls as a normal routine, or whether dedicated dormitories and servant quarters were more common in many places than popular imagination suggests. Records, household accounts, and building layouts can hint at different arrangements depending on the century, the region, and the wealth of the household. What does not change is the physics. Stone steals heat. Moving air steals heat faster. Human beings who want to wake up learn to work with both. So you stand there in the cold corridor and you stop thinking like a modern person hunting a bed. You start thinking like a winter survivor. You find the least drafty pocket you can. You avoid the grand, windy straightaways. You pick a spot that is boring, tucked, and slightly less exposed. You imagine layers, not luxury. You imagine your body heat as a small candle that needs shielding. And yes, you also imagine complaining, because you are human, and you deserve at least one private moment of inner whining. The castle does not care. The castle is basically an enormous stone machine, and its customer service line is permanently closed. Still, you can make it through the night, not by conquering the cold like a heroic warrior, but by making a series of tiny, smart choices. The kind of choices that look like nothing from a distance. The kind of choices that add up to morning. You breathe slowly. You pull your shoulders in. You accept that your new luxury spa is called the corner that does not try to kill you. And you settle your weight carefully, like you are negotiating with the floor itself. Because you are. You drift deeper into the castle's sleeping world and realize the cold is only half the story. The other half is people. Not people in the warm, friendly sense, but people as a strict, ranked system that decides who gets a door, who gets a curtain, and who gets a patch of floor that does not try to turn their lungs into icicles. In a castle, sleep is assigned the way work is assigned. It is not about what you need, it is about what the household can afford to give you without risking the smooth running of everything else. You start by noticing the obvious. The lord and lady vanish into private chambers with thick walls, smaller windows, and controlled access. Even without modern heating, those rooms can be warmer simply because they are easier to close off. They also have beds built to lift bodies off the ground, plus piles of textiles that hold heat. It is mainstream historical fact that elite households often slept in private chambers and used bed hangings, canopies, and heavy fabrics to create a warmer pocket around the bed. It is not just decoration, it is insulation with status attached. You, however, are not the main character of the castle's comfort plan. You are part of its maintenance plan. So you look at the servants who orbit the household and you see a pattern. The ones closest to the Lord's personal needs often sleep closest to the Lord, not because anyone cares about their well-being, but because they must be reachable fast. Valets, ladies' maids, and personal attendants might sleep in an antechamber or a smaller room nearby, sometimes on a truckle bed or on pallets. Their sleep is lighter because their job is to wake quickly. If they get a slightly better spot, it is a tool, like a knife kept sharp for use. Then you look at the next ring outward, the staff who keep the castle functioning rather than serving a single person. Cooks, bakers, brewers, and scullions tend to cluster closer to workspaces because fire and food do not wait for sunrise. In winter, the kitchen side of the building can be the closest thing to a heat bank, but you do not automatically get to sleep there. Access matters. The kitchen is a high-risk zone for theft accusations. Food is valuable. Fuel is valuable. A servant caught sleeping where stored provisions are kept can be treated like a suspect, even if they are just desperate for warmth. So the kitchen staff might have designated corners or rooms nearby, while unrelated workers are pushed away. Lower down the ladder, you meet the people who do heavy lifting, hauling, mucking, scrubbing, carrying water, cleaning ash, and doing the jobs nobody wants to notice unless they stop happening. Their sleeping arrangements tend to be communal and flexible. Some castles have dedicated servant dormitories or loft spaces, especially later periods or larger households, where workers sleep in groups. In other settings, especially when the household is crowded with guests, servants spill into corridors, stair landings, gate passages, and any space that can hold a pallet. The romantic idea that every servant constantly sleeps on hall floors is a bit exaggerated. But the hard truth is that overflow happens, and overflow usually means the coldest, least private spots. You also learn that some jobs come with a built-in reason to be near a particular location at night. Gatekeepers and porters may have a lodge near the entrance because someone must respond if there is trouble. Watchmen and guards might have a room, a bench, or a sheltered place along their route. Stable hands may sleep close to animals because horses are expensive and vulnerable. Here is the uncomfortable part. Proximity to warmth is often proximity to responsibility. If you're sleeping in a relatively sheltered area, it might be because you're expected to wake up and deal with something awful at 2 a.m. Enjoy your slightly warmer misery. You start paying attention to what the castle values, because that points directly to who gets better sleeping options. The castle values security, so people connected to doors and keys get more strategic shelter. The castle values food, so kitchen staff may stay nearer heat and supplies, but under scrutiny. The castle values noble comfort, so attendants cluster close to the chambers. Everyone else is arranged like spare parts, and the rules are not always written down. They live in habit, in the sharp glance of a steward, in the way an older servant points at a corner with their chin, as if that corner has always belonged to someone else. You do not argue, you learn fast. A new servant who sprawls in the wrong place might be kicked awake, not gently, by someone who has been there longer and is not in the mood to negotiate. The castle has its own bedtime politics, and you do not win by being idealistic. Now the practical question: who actually ends up in icy hallways? Often, it is the servants with the least leverage and the least stable place in the household. Temporary workers, extra hands hired for a busy season, messengers who arrive late, or staff attached to visiting nobles may be squeezed into whatever space exists. Large feasts create this problem on purpose. When guests flood in, the normal sleeping map is scrambled. The best rooms go to high-ranking visitors. Mid-level staff are displaced. Low-level staff get shoved into passages. You might hear it described as making do. It is really just scarcity with manners. And here comes a quirky tidbit that makes you squint. There are stories and hints in some accounts of servants sleeping in wardrobes, closets, or behind tapestries to avoid drafts and avoid being seen. Not because they are being silly, but because visibility can be dangerous. If you are seen resting at the wrong time, someone might decide you are lazy. If you are unseen, you might get away with an extra hour. A hidden spot can be warmer too, because air movement is reduced. The trade is obvious. You might wake up with a lint in your hair and a noble's dog staring at you like you're furniture. But you will still be alive. Mostly. As you settle into this social map, you also notice how gender, age, and household custom shape sleep. Women servants may sleep together for safety and propriety. Often in spaces tied to the women's work areas, younger servants might be expected to sleep where they can be summoned easily. Older servants who have earned trust might have a slightly more stable place. And the castle's religious rhythms can matter too. Early rising for prayers or morning tasks means people may sleep in places that shorten the route to duty. Historians still argue whether the hallway sleeper is a typical reality, or an overused image drawn from exceptional moments, like crowded feast days or poorly funded households. The evidence can point both ways. Some buildings include spaces that look like servant dormitories. Some household records imply communal sleeping. Some stories and regulations suggest servants should be near their duties. The variety is the point. There is no single medieval bedtime blueprint. What you can say with confidence is that sleeping location is never random. It is the household's nervous system. It places bodies where they can respond. It keeps valuable spaces controlled. It keeps higher status people insulated in every sense, including literal temperature. And it forces the most disposable workers into the places where comfort is thin and drafts are thick. So you lie down where you are told, or where you can get away with lying down. You're learning that hallway is not one thing. It can be a main passage that funnels wind and footsteps. It can be a tucked service corridor near a pantry. It can be a landing outside a stair. It can be an alcove that catches less air. Your survival depends on understanding the difference. And your social survival depends on understanding who gets to claim which patch of stone. You make your choice like you're choosing a seat on a crowded bus. You pick the place that is least likely to be disturbed, least likely to draw attention, and least likely to freeze you into a decorative statue by morning. The castle keeps breathing around you, full of rules you can feel even when nobody speaks. You close your eyes knowing that warmth is not just a material thing here. It is permission. You start treating the castle like a puzzle box made of stone, where the prize is a few degrees of warmth, not comfort, not coziness, just warmth that keeps your fingers from feeling like wooden spoons. The first thing you learn is that cold is not evenly spread. Even in the same corridor, one spot can be cruel and another spot can be merely rude. Heat moves in patterns, and the castle, unintentionally, creates little pockets where the air is calmer and the temperature is slightly kinder. You walk slowly, listening with your skin. Drafts have a texture. Some come as a steady stream, like the building is exhaling. Others are gusty, as if a door is breathing in and out. You can tell where a corridor connects to an outer wall because the air feels sharper, like it has been outside and came in smug about it. You can also tell where the wind is slipping through cracks because the cold hits one side of your face more than the other. It is weirdly intimate, this sensation of the building touching you with invisible fingers. Now you look for microzones. Inner corners are your first friend. An inside corner breaks airflow, so the draft does not slam into you head on. It swirls and weakens. The temperature difference is small, but your body does not need miracles. It needs margin. Along an interior wall, you might be protected from the direct influence of outside air. Thick walls act as thermal mass, and if they absorbed any warmth during the day from nearby fires, or from sunlight on the opposite side, they may be slightly less punishing at night. This is not warm. It is not actively trying to kill you. Celebrate the small victories. You also learn to avoid the castle's wind highways. Long straight corridors that connect major doors are basically draft pipes. The castle's grand design is impressive to look at, but it is awful for sleeping. If you can see a straight shot from one doorway to another, your body will be the unlucky middleman for all that moving air. Service passages, on the other hand, can be awkwardly shaped, narrower and less aligned. That clumsy design can help you, because the wind hates corners almost as much as you do. Then there are stairwells. They are tricky. Cold air tends to settle low, so the base of a stair can feel like a bowl holding chill. But stairwells also connect different temperature zones. If a warmer area is above, the stair can leak that warmth downward. If a colder area is above, it dumps cold downward. So you learn to test a stairwell like it is a questionable soup. You stand halfway up, pause, and feel whether the air is rising or sinking. You might even feel the faint difference between the steps near a wall and the steps near the centre. Yes, you are becoming the kind of person who evaluates stairs for thermodynamics. This is your life now. A mainstream historical fact that matters here is that castle heating is generally local and room-based, mostly from hearths, fireplaces, ovens, and later, sometimes stoves, rather than central systems. That means warmth does not spread evenly. It leaks, it radiates, it fades fast. So the best sleeping spots for servants are often near places where heat is produced, even if you're not supposed to be there, not right next to the fire like a spoiled cat, but near the spillover, outside a kitchen, beside a bakehouse wall, near a brewery corner, or close to a chimney stack that carries warm smoke upward. Chimneys can act like accidental radiators if the masonry warms up. You do not hug the chimney like you're in love with it, because that looks suspicious. You just happen to be nearby, coincidentally, as if you are an innocent passerby who got sleepy. You begin noticing heat markers, a wall that is slightly less icy to the touch, a patch of air that feels less sharp, the smell of ash or cooking fat, which can mean you are near a heat source that was active recently. Even sound can help. The kitchen side of a castle might be quieter at night, but you can still hear settling pots or the faint drip of water, while grand corridors echo more. Quieter spaces can indicate fewer openings and fewer drafts. It is not guaranteed, but you are working with clues, not certainties. Then there are the castle's leaks, the accidental places where warmth escapes from privileged rooms, under doors, around window shutters, through thin partitions, and along passages that share walls with better heated chambers. You cannot stroll into private rooms, but you can benefit from their waste heat. It feels morally questionable, like stealing warmth by proximity, but the castle's morality is not built for your comfort. If the wall near a chamber is even a tiny bit warmer, you lean into that like it is the last good decision you will make all day. You also learn that the worst cold often comes with damp. Moist air conducts heat away from you more efficiently and makes everything feel colder. Basements, ground-level passages near wet earth, and areas close to cisterns or drains can feel clammy. That clammy cold is the kind that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. So you aim for higher ground when possible. Upper levels can be less damp, and also collect a bit of rising warmth from below. But higher levels can be drafty if the roof is leaky or the walls are exposed. Again, you test and choose. You do not assume. Here is a quirky tidbit that feels like folk science. Some servants believe certain stones are colder than others, not in the spiritual sense, but in a practical sense tied to the feel of different masonry. They might prefer sleeping near timber partitions, near stored textiles, or even near stacks of wooden objects because wood feels less cold than stone. In reality, wood is a poorer conductor of heat than stone, so it does feel less icy. The belief becomes a rule of thumb. If you can put your shoulder against wood instead of stone, you do it. If you can tuck yourself near a pile of linen rather than bare masonry, you do it. You become a creature who chooses materials like a squirrel chooses a nest. Historians still argue whether certain castle designs intentionally considered comfort for lower status residents, or whether servants simply adapted to buildings built primarily for defense. Display and hierarchy. Some architectural features that help with warmth might be deliberate for elite comfort, and only incidentally useful for others. Some might be pure accident, but your experience is not theoretical. You are living in the physics of it. So you map the space in your mind. You note where warmth lingers after work. You note where drafts slice through like knives. You note where walls feel different, where floors feel less wet, where the air is calmer. You move like you're doing reconnaissance, except the battlefield is the corridor, and your enemy is the night. And once you find a spot that feels slightly less hostile, you claim it quietly. You do not sprawl, you make yourself compact, because compact things lose less heat. You breathe low, slow, and you let your body start conserving. The castle does not suddenly become kind, but you have found a microzone, a tiny bend in the stone world where the cold is less aggressive. In a place like this, that is the closest thing to winning. You stop thinking of bedding as something soft and pretty, and start thinking of it as a survival device made from whatever the household can spare. In a castle, the best textiles are reserved for the people who are allowed to be fragile. For you, warmth comes from materials that look humble, smell earthy, and feel scratchy, but perform like a layered shield. The secret is not thickness alone. The secret is trapped air. You want fibers that hold little pockets of stillness, because still air is what slows your body heat from escaping. The first material you meet is straw. Straw is not glamorous, but it is brilliant in the way a cheap hack is brilliant. It is dry when stored well, springy enough to lift you off stone, and it creates thousands of tiny air gaps. A straw pallet can be nothing more than a sack stuffed with stalks, or a loose pile kept in a corner and refreshed when it becomes too flattened. You learn fast that flattened straw is basically betrayal. When it compresses, it loses air pockets and becomes just a cold, crunchy mat, so you shake it, fluff it, rebuild it, like you're making a nest. Yes, you're basically a human doing bird behaviour, and you're not proud, but you're also not frozen. Rushes show up too, especially in spaces where floors are strewn. Rushes can be layered and replaced, and in some places they are mixed with aromatic herbs. People sometimes do that for smell, sometimes for tradition, and sometimes because they believe the plants help ward off sickness. The practical benefit is that rushes provide a thin insulating layer and reduce direct contact with damp stone. The not-so-practical benefit is that you can tell yourself you are sleeping on bedding instead of floor trash, which matters more than you would think when morale is hanging by a thread. Then comes wool, the real champion of medieval warmth. Wool retains insulating value even when it's a bit damp, and it traps air beautifully. It can be a blanket, a cloak, a worn-out coverlet, or an old garment pressed into new use. A mainstream historical fact here is that wool is widely used in medieval Europe for clothing and textiles because it is durable and warm, and it shows up everywhere, from peasant cloaks to high-end cloth. Servants may not get fine wool, but they often have access to something woolen, even if it is patched, rough, and itchy enough to make you question your life choices. You discover that a thin wool layer between you and the stone is worth more than 2 layers of smooth linen. Linen is great for sheets and shirts, but it does not insulate like wool. Linen is a skin-friendly barrier, a way to keep rough fibres from scraping you raw, but the real heat retention comes from wool and from bulk. So you start layering strategically, linen or a softer cloth against skin if you have it, then wool on top, then any extra fabric as a windbreak. And yes, there is a windbreak concept even indoors. The biggest threat to a sleeping body in a corridor is moving air, so the outermost layer of your bedding might be something tighter woven, like a cloak or a heavy cover, not because it is warm by itself, but because it blocks drafts from stripping away your heat. You tuck edges under you, you wrap corners over your shoulders, you make a crude envelope. You're not trying to look neat, you're trying to keep air from circulating around your body. Now you meet the bedtick, which is basically a fabric casing stuffed with straw, chaff, or other filler. It is not a mattress in the modern sense, but it gives you lift and insulation. The stuffing might be replaced periodically, especially in households that can manage it, because old stuffing gets compacted and filthy. For a servant, a bedtick can be shared, passed down, or reserved for certain staff. Sometimes you get one. Sometimes you get the floor and a prayer. The variability is huge, and your gratitude is calibrated accordingly. Here is a quirky tidbit that makes you blink. Some servants use their bedding as storage and protection at the same time. They might tuck spare clothes or small possessions into the straw or under the pallet, partly to keep it from being stolen, and partly because extra cloth inside the bedding adds insulation. It is like hiding your valuables inside your life jacket. If someone steals your blanket, you are not just inconvenienced, you are endangered. So bedding becomes security, and security becomes warmth. You also learn the enemy of bedding: moisture. Damp straw starts to rot and smell. Damp cloth steals heat faster. In winter, dampness can come from the air, from leaky walls, from wet boots, from condensation, from breath. If you cover your face too tightly, your breath can dampen the fabric near your mouth and nose. That damp patch becomes colder as the night goes on. So you angle your head, leave a small gap, or pull fabric up to your cheeks without sealing it completely. You manage your own humidity like a miserable little climate engineer. Then there is the problem of parasites. Bedding can attract fleas and lice, especially when people sleep in shared spaces and textiles are reused. This is one reason rushes and herbs appear in stories. Some people believe strong-smelling plants help. Sometimes they do repel insects a bit, sometimes not much. But even if it is mostly wishful thinking, it gives you an action to take. You can scatter something, rub something, shake something out. It is better than lying there feeling like you're being nibbled by invisible rice grains. Historians still argue how widespread clean bedding was for lower status workers, and how often materials were refreshed, because sources tend to reflect ideals, rules, or the habits of wealthier households. What is clear is that bedding was not a single object. It was a system, a base layer to get you off stone, an insulating layer to trap air, an outer layer to block drafts, and a set of habits to keep it from becoming damp and flat. So you build your little nest. You pull straw into a thicker pad under your torso, because your core heat matters most. You do not waste insulation under your legs if you can move some of that bulk under your chest and hips. You keep your feet wrapped, because toes are dramatic and will complain first. You tuck fabric edges so drafts cannot slide in and steal warmth. You position your head so your breath does not soak the cloth. It is all tiny adjustments, and each one adds minutes, then hours. You lie down, and it still feels cold. It is not a miracle, but it is manageable. The stone is no longer directly drinking your heat. The air around you is calmer. The fibres around your body are holding pockets of warmth like a careful hand holding water. You're not cozy, but you're not losing. In a castle winter, that difference is everything. You learn quickly that for a servant, sleep is not a time to undress and become delicate. Sleep is a time to armour up. Clothing is not just what you wear for work. It is the most portable insulation you own, and on a winter night it becomes the difference between I woke up stiff and I did not wake up at all. The castle does not hand you a heated room. It hands you responsibilities and expects you to bring your own warmth. So you begin with layers, because layers trap air, and trapped air is the whole game. Against your skin, you might have a linen shift or shirt. Linen feels cleaner and reduces irritation, which matters when your outer layers are rough and reused. Over that, you pull on wool. Wool might be a tunic, a kirtle, a wrap, or a patched garment that has served 3 previous owners and now smells like honest labour. It itches, but it insulates even when the air is damp. Your body heat warms the wool fibres. The fibres trap air, and that air becomes a thin private climate around you. You keep your legs covered too. Hose, leggings, or wrapped cloth around calves is not fashion for you. It is heat retention. Blood cools fast in extremities, and cold legs can pull warmth away from your core. You also discover a simple truth that sounds silly until you live it. A cold neck can make your whole body feel cold. So you wrap a scarf or a strip of cloth around your neck, or you tuck your chin into your collar like a grumpy turtle. Head covering becomes non-negotiable. A wool cap, a coif, even a folded cloth tied around your head. It all matters. Your head loses a lot of heat because it is exposed and full of blood flow. Covering it also helps you sleep, because cold ears make every sound feel louder. A cap muffles sensation. It turns the castle's nighttime noises into a softer blur. You cannot control the temperature of the corridor, but you can control how much your body radiates into it. Then you get tactical with what you already carry. Cloaks are the obvious hero. A cloak can be a blanket, a windbreak, and a top layer all at once. You can wrap it around your shoulders, then fold the hem over your feet. You can pin it so it stays closed. You can use it as a makeshift sleeping bag by tucking edges under your body. The goal is to stop drafts from flushing away the warm air your clothing layers create. A mainstream historical fact that helps anchor this is that medieval clothing often uses wool as a primary material for outer garments, and cloaks and mantles are common across classes because they are practical for outdoor travel and cold interiors. Even if your cloak is cheap and threadbare, the shape is functional. It is fabric engineered by necessity, and necessity is the most honest designer there is. You also learn about sleep posture as part of clothing strategy. If you lie sprawled, your cloak opens, your layers shift, and drafts sneak in. If you curl slightly, you reduce your surface area and keep fabric wrapped around you. You might sleep on your side with knees bent, hands tucked in. This is not just fetal comfort, it is thermal efficiency. Your body becomes a compact bundle, and your clothing stays arranged the way you need it. Now, there is a social element too. You cannot always sleep with your boots on. Boots are dirty, they track mud and manure, and some households treat wearing footwear in certain spaces as disrespectful. But if the floor is bitter cold, you keep something on your feet. Thick socks, felted wraps, spare cloth strips. You might even stuff fabric inside footwear if you must remove boots, then keep the footwear close so you can slip into it quickly if summoned. Imagine being jolted awake by a shout and needing to sprint through icy corridors with bare feet. Your feet would write an angry complaint letter to your brain, and your brain would ignore it because the Lord is yelling, so you prepare. Here is a quirky tidbit that shows up in practical law. Some servants tie their sleeves or wrap cloth around wrists to keep drafts from sneaking up their arms. People talk about cold creeping into joints, and whether or not they describe it medically, they are noticing a real feeling. Cold air sliding through sleeve openings can chill you fast, so you tighten cuffs, add wrist wraps, or tuck hands into the body of your tunic. It looks awkward. It works. You also use your belt not just for holding tools, but for holding warmth. A belt can keep layers close to your core and prevent fabric from lifting when you move. If your tunic rides up, a draft can hit your belly and make you instantly regret everything. So you cinch, not for style, but for seal. You are basically weatherproofing yourself. And of course, clothing is not infinite. Servants often have limited sets of garments. If you sweat during work and then sleep in damp clothing, you can get dangerously cold once you stop moving. That is one of the quiet winter hazards. Sweat is a trap. If you have a dry shirt or a spare wrap, you change into it. If you do not, you at least loosen layers to let moisture evaporate before you settle. You might stand near a heat source just long enough to dry fabric slightly, not enough to scorch it, just enough to take the edge off the damp. The castle's air can be unforgiving, and damp cloth against skin can feel like a cold slap that never ends. Historians still argue how common it was for lower status workers to have multiple changes of clothing, because records often highlight purchases and allocations without revealing how worn. Shared or repaired garments became over time, but the logic of survival pushes you toward the same practices. Keep insulation dry, keep drafts out, keep extremities covered, and keep yourself ready to move at any moment. So you settle into your clothes like they are a nest you can wear. You pull the cap low, you tuck the scarf. You fold the cloak carefully so it seals around you. You arrange your feet so they are wrapped and protected. You do a quick mental inventory of what is exposed, what is loose, what might flap open if you shift. Then you stop. You let your breathing slow. You let your body warm the air inside your layers. And in that quiet moment, you realize why servants can sleep in icy places and still live. It is not because the castle is kinder than it looks. It is because you have turned yourself into a small, layered shelter. The castle is stone. You are technique. You discover that the warmest object available in a winter castle is not a fire, not a blanket, not even a thick wall. It is another human being who is also miserable. Shared body heat is ancient technology, and it works so well that it creates its own rules, its own etiquette, and its own quiet arguments. In a corridor or a crowded servant space, you can either pretend you are an island or accept that warmth is often a group project. So you watch the sleeping arrangements form the way birds gather on a branch. People cluster without announcing it. One person settles near a wall, another fits in beside them, then a third. Soon there is a little line of bodies, shoulders almost touching, knees angled to avoid kicking. The goal is to reduce exposed surface area. When bodies are close, each person is a windbreak for the next. The air between you warms and stays warmer. A single sleeper is like a lone candle in a drafty room. A cluster is a small campfire of breathing, even if nobody wants to admit it. This is where rank and trust become very physical. You do not automatically press up against anyone you like. There are boundaries, especially around gender, age, and household expectations of propriety. In many settings, men and women sleep in separate clusters or spaces when possible. Younger servants may be placed with others their age. People who are not trusted might be kept at the edge of a group, both for social reasons and because theft is always a fear. If someone's pouch goes missing in the night, the person sleeping closest becomes suspect. Warmth has consequences. A mainstream historical fact that matters here is that communal sleeping is common in many pre-modern households. with multiple people sharing rooms and even beds depending on status and crowding. Privacy is not assumed. The idea that sleep must happen alone is a modern preference, not a medieval default. When space is limited and nights are cold, togetherness is practical. It can also be forced, because the household squeezes bodies into available areas the way you pack winter supplies into a chest. You feel the awkwardness immediately. Someone's elbow is sharp. Someone's breath smells like onions. Someone mutters in their sleep like they are negotiating with a demon. And someone, inevitably, snores with the confidence of a person who believes the world should hear them. You do not have the energy to be picky. You're too tired to be offended. Still, your brain keeps a small tally of annoyances, because being cold does not erase your personality. It just makes it crankier. You also learn the practical positions. People lie head to foot sometimes, especially if the space is narrow, because it allows more bodies to fit and reduces the direct blast of breath in someone's face. It can also spread warmth more evenly across the cluster. If everyone's heads are on the same side, the group might become a little warmer on one end and colder on the other. Which sounds like a joke until you are the unlucky person at the cold end. You might rotate positions on different nights, or you might accept your fate if you are low in the pecking order. Here is a quirky tidbit that makes you smile despite yourself. Some servants develop quiet sleep alliances. Two people who work the same area or trust each other might always settle near each other. Not romantically, just practically. They share small habits. One keeps an eye out for a supervisor, the other shares a scrap of cloth for extra covering. One wakes the other if a draft shifts. It is like a tiny team inside the larger machine of the household. Warmth builds friendship faster than any formal introduction, but there are risks. The closer bodies are, the more easily sickness can spread, especially respiratory illness. People in the past may not understand germs, but they understand patterns. If one person coughs hard for days, others might keep a bit of distance. They might attribute illness to bad air, to chill, to imbalance in the body, but they still notice contagion in a practical sense. So clustering is a balance between warmth and fear. This is one reason certain servants might prefer sleeping slightly apart even if it is colder. They might rather shiver than share air with someone who sounds like a collapsing bellows. Historians still argue how much choice servants actually had in these arrangements, because some evidence suggests strict household management and designated sleeping places, while other evidence implies more fluid, improvised patterns, especially during busy times or in less regulated households. The truth likely varies widely. Some stewards want order. Some households accept whatever keeps work getting done. Either way, your lived reality is that bodies are resources. Your warmth is partly yours and partly borrowed. And borrowing warmth has etiquette. You do not sprawl into someone's space. You do not hog the best sheltered side of the cluster unless you are allowed. You do not steal someone's blanket edge in the night, even though you absolutely want to, because that is how fights start. If you need to adjust, you do it slowly, careful not to wake others. Waking a tired servant is like poking a bear, except the bear has chores at dawn and will blame you for all of them. You also notice that sound changes in a cluster. The castle's noises feel farther away. The shared breathing creates a soft rhythm. The warmth makes your muscles loosen. Even the smell becomes familiar, a blend of wool, smoke, and work. It is not pleasant like perfume, but it is human. It reminds you that survival here is communal, even if everyone pretends they are tough lone survivors. And then there is the quiet comedy of it. You might be pressed shoulder to shoulder with someone who spent the entire day acting superior because they work closer to the pantry, only to find them curled up like a cat, shamelessly soaking up the group's warmth. Another person might insist they sleep better alone, while inching closer and closer until they are basically glued to the cluster like a barnacle. You keep your eyes closed and let them save face. The cold makes liars of everyone. You settle in, adjusting your position so your back is protected and your front is covered. You aim your feet where they will not kick someone, because if you start a midnight feud over toes, you will lose. You let your shoulders relax, and you feel the heat of other bodies seep through layers of wool and cloth. It is subtle at first, then more noticeable, like a slow-spreading warmth, that convinces your brain to stop sounding alarms. In this arrangement, you're not just sleeping, you're participating in a quiet, unspoken agreement. We will share warmth, we will tolerate each other's noises, and we will all wake up functional enough to keep this stone beast running. The castle is cold, but the cluster is a small defiance. You close your eyes and let that defiance do its work. You learn that fire in a castle is not a constant comfort. It is a timed event with rules, shortages, and watchful eyes. The household does not burn fuel all night just so you can toast your toes. Wood is labour, charcoal is expense. Every log has been hauled, split, and guarded like treasure. So warmth comes in waves. Your job, if you want to stay alive and not get yelled at, is to ride those waves without getting caught surfing. In the evening siesta, the hearths are busiest, cooking, heating water, finishing tasks, keeping the main spaces presentable. Even if you're not in the best rooms, you feel the castle's last daytime warmth drifting outward in thin, stingy threads. People angle their work near fires when they can. A scullion might take a moment to organise something close to the hearth. A porter might linger near a brazier with the excuse of checking equipment. Everyone has a reason. Everyone is lying a little. Then the fires change. The big blaze shrinks. The steward or the kitchen master cares less about your comfort than about not losing the next day's flame. So the coals are managed carefully. A mainstream historical fact here is that many households bank fires overnight, covering embers with ash to keep them smouldering so they can be revived in the morning. That way you do not waste time and effort restarting from scratch. This practice shapes the entire night. It dictates who stays awake, who tends embers, and where warmth remains. You see the people assigned to fire duty, and you instantly respect them because their hands smell like ash, and their eyes look permanently tired. They are not heroic in the storybook sense. They are practical. They know how to rake coals into a tight mound, how to cover them just enough, how to keep a spark alive without letting it flare. They understand the line between safe and you just burn down half the castle, and that line is thinner than anyone wants to admit. For you, the ember phase creates a brief window of opportunity. The masonry around a hearth holds heat. Stone and brick absorb warmth while the fire is strong, then slowly release it. So even after the flames die down, the surrounding area can stay less cold for a while. Not hot, not friendly, but less cruel. That is when you see servants hovering near walls, sitting on benches, leaning close enough to warm their backs while pretending they are simply waiting for instructions. You do not press too close. A sleepy servant who singes their clothing is not just foolish. They are evidence of carelessness. There are also braziers. A brazier is like portable warmth, a metal container for coals that can heat a smaller space. In some castles, braziers are used in chambers or passages, but they come with danger. Coals can spill. Fumes can build up. If a brazier is moved into a tight room with poor ventilation, it can make people sick. People might not describe it in modern terms, but they know the feeling of headache, dizziness, and weak limbs. So braziers are controlled. They belong to higher status areas or supervised places. If you see one, you treat it like a noble. You admire it from a respectful distance. Here is a quirky tidbit that shows the household's paranoia. In some settings, servants are explicitly forbidden to take live coals or embers away from hearths without permission. Fire is a tool and a threat. A stolen coal could warm your feet, or it could start a hidden blaze in straw bedding. So the rule becomes strict. If you need warmth, you're expected to get it from the shared fire zones, not by carrying fire into improvised sleeping spots. Of course, rules and reality sometimes wrestle. A desperate person might risk it anyway. But the risk is not just punishment. It is guilt if something goes wrong. As the night deepens, the castle gets quieter and the warmth becomes more guarded. Fires are reduced in unused spaces. Doors are shut. Some corridors go dark. The remaining warm points feel like islands. People on duty drift toward them as if pulled by gravity. Watchmen might pause near a hearth to take the edge off their chill before continuing their rounds. Kitchen staff might rest near the bakehouse wall after finishing late tasks. Even animals, if they're nearby, can become part of the heat map. A dog curled near embers is not just cute, it is smart. Now you start thinking about the timing of your own rest. If you sleep too early, you might miss the best residual warmth and wake later when the stone has cooled. If you sleep too late, you might be summoned before you get any rest. The household's rhythm forces you into compromises. Some servants snatch short sleep in warm zones, then move when the area cools or when someone important arrives. Sleep becomes modular. You take what you can, where you can, without becoming a nuisance. Historians still argue about how often servants truly slept near active hearths versus being pushed away for safety and discipline. Household regulations and moral writings sometimes scold servants for idling by the fire. That implies it happened enough to annoy people with authority, but annoyance is not proof of routine, it is proof of tension. Warmth attracts humans. Humans make rules to control what they want themselves. That logic is timeless. You also learn about the psychology of embers. A fire that is almost out is strangely comforting. The glow is soft. The heat is gentle. The danger feels lower. It can trick you into relaxing, but embers still bite. A careless hand can burn. A stray coal can ignite cloth. So you develop a cautious respect. You position yourself where you can benefit without tempting fate. You keep your bedding and clothing away from the hearth edge. You do not fall asleep with your cloak draped too close. You do not want to wake up smelling like smoke and panic. Sometimes you hear the faint scrape of a rake, the quiet clink of a shovel, the sound of ash settling. Those are the night's firekeepers at work, maintaining tomorrow's spark. Their job is boring until it fails, and then it becomes a disaster that wakes everyone. You're grateful they exist because their discipline makes the whole castle possible. Fire is the castle's hidden heart. It feeds food, light, and warmth. It also threatens to destroy everything if mishandled. So you take your warmth in measured doses. You let a heated wall warm your back. You let the last glow calm your nerves. You learn to read the ember life cycle like a clock, and when the fire finally fades to a dull whisper, you accept that the castle will not hold your hand. It will simply cool, slowly and stubbornly, until morning routines awaken the flame again. Your task is to stay smart, stay small, stay insulated, and treat every bit of warmth as something precious enough to be handled carefully. You discover the castle's most satisfying little secret. You can carry warmth with you, not as fire, but as stored heat. If you cannot sleep beside a hearth, and you cannot drag a brazier into your corner, you can still cheat the cold with objects that have spent time near heat. This is where servants become quietly inventive, using materials that look ordinary but behave like small. Obedient heaters when treated right. The simplest method is the warmed stone. You find a stone or brick placed near a fire earlier in the evening, not so close that it cracks or becomes dangerously hot, but close enough to soak up heat. The stone holds that warmth for a surprisingly long time, because dense material releases heat slowly. You wrap it in cloth to avoid burns and to slow heat loss even more. Then you bring it to your sleeping spot and tuck it where it helps most, usually near feet or between knees. Warm feet can make your whole body relax. Cold feet can make you lie awake inventing new curses for winter, so you prioritize the toes. A mainstream historical fact here is that hot stones, heated bricks, and similar thermal mass tricks have long been used in many cultures to warm beds and bodies, especially before modern heating. The medieval household does not need to invent thermodynamics to notice that a warmed object stays warm. This practice fits perfectly with a world where fuel is costly and personal comfort is rationed. But there are rules, spoken or unspoken. You do not take stones from sacred places. You do not steal bricks from a wall, obviously. Unless you enjoy being executed by a mason's stare, you use what is available. Kitchen floors sometimes have loose bricks. Bakehouses have tiles. Hearth edges have stones that can be warmed. Sometimes you find a smooth rock that someone keeps for this purpose, a shared tool passed around like a secret handshake. You also learn about safer choices. Stones can be too hot and burn skin through thin cloth. They can also be too damp and crack when heated, a nasty surprise that can send fragments flying. So experienced servants choose dense, dry pieces and heat them gradually. They test with the back of a hand, quick touch, pull away, then again. If it feels painfully hot, it is not ready. You want steady warmth, not punishment. Then there is the warmed tile or brick placed at the foot of a pallet. It is like a medieval foot warmer. You slide it into a cloth bag or wrap it in old fabric. If you have two, you place one near feet and one near your core. If you have one, feet win. You're not being sentimental, you're being strategic. Feet are where cold bites, and when cold bites, sleep becomes a struggle. Here is a quirky tidbit that sounds like folk magic, but is really just habit. Some servants prefer to warm a piece of ceramic, like a small pot shard or a flat tile, because they believe it gives a gentler heat than stone. The reality is that different materials release heat differently, and a flat tile spreads warmth across a wider area. The servant does not need a lecture on heat capacity. They just know what feels better. They will swear by their favourite warmer, the way people swear by a specific brand of pillow today. Of course, you cannot always carry a hot brick openly. It looks suspicious. It looks like you stole fuel. So this practice often happens quietly, using justified objects. A kitchen helper might claim they are moving a warmed brick for drying something. A laundress might say the warmth helps soften cloth. A stable hand might say it helps with a stiff strap. Are these true? Sometimes. Are they convenient excuses? Absolutely. In a castle, many truths are folded into one another like laundry. You also see another trick, warming sand or grain. In some contexts, a pouch of grain warmed near a fire can hold heat and mould to the body. It is softer than stone. It is also risky, because grain is valuable, and a warm pouch might be seen as theft or waste. So this is not common for the lower status staff, but you might see it used in sick rooms or by people with access to stores. It is the kind of comfort that becomes medical when someone wants to justify it. Now you learn the limits. A warmed object helps you fall asleep, but it does not last all night. Its warmth fades. It might buy you an hour or two of deeper rest. That can be enough. In a world where sleep is broken and duty interrupts, an hour of real warmth can feel like a banquet. But you do not rely on it alone. It is an addition, not a foundation. Your clothing, your bedding, your draft avoidance, all of that still matters. Historians still argue about how widespread these portable warming practices were among servants specifically, because everyday improvisation leaves fewer records than official purchases or elite routines. Wealthy people's habits are easier to trace. Servants' tricks often survive as hints, passing mentions, or common sense inferred from materials and living conditions. But the logic is strong. When warmth is scarce, you store it, carry it, and concentrate it where your body needs it most. You also become careful about placement. You never put a hot stone directly against bare skin. You never tuck it near straw without a proper wrap, because straw is dry and can catch if an ember or coal is mistakenly used. You never let it roll loose. You make a cradle for it, a nook in cloth, a corner of bedding that holds it steady. You treat it like a small animal that might bite if mishandled. The most satisfying moment is the first contact. You settle down, you tuck the wrapped brick near your feet, and you feel warmth bloom through layers. Your toes stop screaming, your calves loosen. Your whole body drops a notch in tension. You breathe out and realize you are holding tight in ways you did not even notice. Warmth makes your thoughts slow down. It makes the castle feel less hostile. It makes you believe morning is possible. Then, inevitably, it cools. You wake slightly, half aware, noticing the warmth has turned to lukewarm. You might shift it closer to your core. You might roll it between feet like a sleepy cat playing with a toy. You might curse quietly, then laugh at yourself because you are literally sharing a bed with a brick. This is your life, and you are making it work. By the time your body settles again, the brick is no longer a heater. It is just not cold yet, and even that helps. It is a small victory, the kind that keeps a servant going through endless winter nights. You have found a way to carry a piece of the fire without carrying fire itself. In a stone castle, that is as close to magic as you are likely to get. You realize that a hallway is only as cold as the wind that can reach you. Stone can be brutal, sure, but moving air is what turns unpleasant into dangerous. So you start treating drafts the way sailors treat waves. You do not fight the whole sea, you build barriers, redirect the force, and create a calmer pocket where you can rest. The castle already contains tools for this. Even if nobody calls them insulation, heavy hangings, curtains, tapestries, screens, and even furniture can change airflow dramatically. A single hanging cloth can break a draft and stop it from sweeping over your body. It does not need to be thick, it just needs to interrupt the current. The air slows, your body's heat stays closer, and the temperature in your little pocket creeps up by just enough to matter. A mainstream historical fact here is that textiles like tapestries and wall hangings are used in many medieval and early modern interiors, not only for decoration, but also to help with insulation and draft reduction. They can add a layer of still air between the wall and the room and reduce the feeling of cold radiating from stone. For elite spaces, this is luxury. For you, it is a practical feature you quietly benefit from when you can. But you cannot just grab a lord's tapestry and make yourself a tent. That is how you become a legend, and not the fun kind. So you look for lower status equivalents, service curtains, rough hangings, spare cloth used to partition work areas, or even the backs of large chests and cupboards placed along corridors. Storage furniture is common in castles, and it is useful for more than storing things. A big wooden chest against a wall can block cold drafts coming from gaps near the floor. Wood is also less cold to sit against than stone, so you position yourself behind it, like a child hiding in a game. Except the stakes are your body temperature. Screens are another gift. A folding screen or a simple panel can split a draft and create a sheltered nook. In a household that values order, screens might be used to create privacy in a hall, or to keep servants out of sight during certain moments. When night comes, that same screen can become a windshield. You do not move it without permission if it is important, but you may be allowed to settle in its lee. The screen becomes a wall within a wall, and that extra layer matters. You also learn how doors act like draft engines. A door that opens to an outer courtyard brings in cold air like a bucket of ice dumped into the corridor. Even when shut, a poorly fitted door leaks air around its edges. Servants sometimes stuff cracks with cloth, straw, or even twisted rushes. Not as an official repair, but as a temporary plug. It looks crude, but it can reduce the biting stream that hits ankles all night. Of course, you cannot block an important doorway completely. If the door must open quickly in an emergency, a stuffed crack becomes a hazard. So you learn to plug lightly, not seal. You reduce the worst flow without turning the castle into a trap. Here is a quirky tidbit that makes you grin. Some servants develop a habit of draft listening. They can hear a draft as a faint whistle or hiss through a gap, especially when the rest of the castle is quiet. They might lie down, then sit up, then shuffle 2 feet to the left, because the sound tells them the air is cutting right across their face. It is like trying to sleep next to a mosquito, except the mosquito is the building itself. Then there are stair landings and alcoves. Architectural niches, door recesses, and wall bends can act as natural wind traps. If a corridor turns, the draft loses momentum. If a doorway is set back, the recess can be calmer. You choose these spots not because they are pretty, but because geometry is on your side. A right angle is a blessing. A straight line is a curse. You also use your own belongings as barriers. A rolled cloak can be placed along the edge of your bedding to block a low draft. A basket, a bucket, even a bundle of firewood can be positioned to interrupt airflow. Again, you do not steal or rearrange critical supplies. You just take advantage of what is already there, nudging it slightly. In a castle, everything has a place, and if you move something too far, someone will notice at dawn and decide you are the reason the world is falling apart. Now you start thinking about vertical space. Drafts often travel low along the floor. If you can lift yourself even slightly, you might escape the coldest layer of air. A bench, a low platform, a wooden pallet, even a thick layer of straw can help. This is not about being higher for heat rising. In a corridor, heat rising is a fantasy. This is about avoiding cold pooling at floor level. The difference between sleeping on bare stone and sleeping on a wooden bench can feel like the difference between misery and manageable misery, which is still a win. Historians still argue how widespread and intentional draft control was in servant spaces, because elite interiors leave more visible evidence of insulation efforts, while service areas are less documented. But servants, being human, would notice the same physics and adapt. You do not need official instruction to realise a curtain stops wind. You just need one night of your nose freezing. You also learn not to overdo it. A fully enclosed little tent of fabric might trap warmth, but it might also trap stale air and moisture. Breath builds dampness. Dampness chills. So you want a barrier that blocks the draft while allowing enough circulation that you do not wake up feeling clammy and cold. You create a half shelter, not a sealed cave. You are building comfort, not a swamp. As you settle into your chosen nook, you arrange your setup like a tiny stage set. Barrier behind you to block the strongest draft. Something at foot level to interrupt low airflow. Bedding angled so your head is not directly in the stream. You tuck fabric edges, not too tight but enough to reduce gaps. The goal is to create stillness. Still air is warmth's best friend. Then you feel it. The moment the draft stops biting, your shoulders unclench, your breathing slows. The castle's cold is still there, pressing from the stone and the night, but it is no longer actively slicing through you. You have taken a hallway, a place that was never meant to be a bedroom, and turned it into a shelter through nothing but positioning and barriers. You have not changed the weather. You have changed your exposure to it. That is the kind of skill that keeps servants alive and keeps them quiet enough that the household can pretend everything runs smoothly. You learn that the castle does not offer you one long peaceful sleep. It offers you a schedule disguised as night. Someone always needs to be awake, and if you are one of those someones, your rest becomes a series of quick dips into darkness rather than a full swim. In winter, that fragmentation can be dangerous, because your body warms when you sleep deeply and shivers when you wake, so the household develops routines that keep people functioning without letting anyone freeze in place. Night watches are the obvious structure. Gates must be checked, fires must be tended, valuable rooms must be guarded, animals must be monitored, water must not freeze in critical places. A mainstream historical fact is that many medieval and early modern households and fortifications organised night duty into watches, rotating responsibility across the night to maintain security and basic operations. Not everyone stands at the same post, but the concept of shifts is real. The castle runs like a relay race, and you are one of the runners. You see how it works in practice. A watchman takes a circuit, pauses at known points, listens, then moves on. A porter checks the gate area, checks locks, checks for anyone trying to slip in, then retreats to a sheltered spot. A kitchen worker keeps an eye on embers and stored supplies, making sure sparks do not escape and that no one borrows food. A stable hand checks animals, adjusts bedding, and listens for the sound of distress that can turn into expensive disaster. Each job has its own rhythm, but they share one thing. You cannot simply collapse and vanish for 8 hours, so you adapt. You begin taking rest opportunities the way a thirsty person takes sips, a short rest near a warm wall, a doze on a bench between rounds, a quick nap in a sheltered corner while someone else is on their circuit. You do not aim for perfect sleep. You aim for functional survival. You train your body to drop into rest quickly, like a soldier, like a sailor, like anyone who lives by interruption. The castle also creates informal signals. A bell might mark certain hours in some places, but more often it's human communication. A tap at a door, a whispered name, a knock on a beam, a lantern moved in a certain way. People learn how to wake each other without waking everyone. You do not want to start a chain reaction of grumpy servants sitting up and glaring like angry owls. So waking becomes precise. You touch a shoulder, you whisper, you step back. If the person does not respond, you whisper again and hope they are not dead, because that would be inconvenient in addition to tragic. Here is a quirky tidbit that feels like dark humour. Some night watch routines include little warmth stops that are unofficial but widely understood. A particular corner where the air is calmer, a point near a chimney stack where the masonry feels less cold, a spot near the kitchen where lingering heat makes your fingers work again. No one writes these stops down. They are passed person to person like gossip. New workers learn them quickly, because cold teaches faster than any supervisor. You also learn that rotating rest is about fairness, but also about control. If one person always gets the best dozing spot and another always gets the coldest bench, Resentment grows. Resentment makes mistakes. Mistakes make disasters. So experienced staff sometimes rotate who rests where, especially among a team that must rely on each other. It is not kindness. It is practical management. A resentful watchman might forget to check something. A sleepy porter might miss a sound. The castle cannot afford that. You begin noticing how the cold changes your alertness. At first, you are sharp because discomfort keeps you awake. Then you become dull because your body is conserving energy. Your hands fumble with keys, your eyes water, your brain slows. This is when shift structure matters most. A fresh person takes over while you get a short rest, and that rest, even if it is only 30 minutes, can reset your ability to function. Without rotation, people become dangerously tired and cold at the same time, and that is when accidents happen. The castle's night duty also affects how you prepare your sleeping setup. You cannot create a perfect nest that takes 10 minutes to arrange if you might be summoned in 2 minutes. So you keep your bedding simple and quick. You keep your shoes accessible. You keep a cloak ready to throw on. You learn to sleep in positions that allow a fast rise without stumbling. Nothing is more embarrassing than waking, standing, and immediately stepping on your own blanket like a trap you set for yourself. The castle already humiliates you enough. You do not need to help it. Historians still argue how standardized night watch systems are across different castles, regions, and periods. Because some places have formal military-like arrangements, and others operate more like a household with ad hoc duties. But the need is consistent. Someone must keep the place safe. Someone must keep key operations alive. Night does not pause a castle's responsibilities. It just makes them colder. You also see how watch duty becomes a social filter. Some people are trusted with keys and patrol routes. Others are kept on the simpler tasks. Trust can mean you get a slightly warmer position, like a gate lodge, because the household wants you stationed there. Distrust can mean you are stuck in a colder corridor where you are visible and controlled. Comfort follows authority in strange ways. You might be warmer because you are monitored, which is not exactly a cozy thought, but it is real. As the night stretches, you start to feel the castle's rhythm like a heartbeat. A pause, a patrol, a quiet, a knock, a doze, a wake. It is exhausting, but it is structured. That structure helps you survive. It keeps your body from sinking into deep chill for too long. It keeps you moving enough to generate heat, then resting enough to recover. It is not kind, but it is balanced. You take your turn, then you hand it off. You settle for a short rest, eyes closing as soon as you stop moving. Your muscles loosen, your breathing deepens, and the cold becomes a background pressure rather than a sharp attack. Then a whisper pulls you back. You rise, you wrap yourself, you step into the corridor again. The castle continues, and you continue with it, surviving the night through rotation, routine, and the simple stubborn fact that someone has to. You learn that the warmest places in a castle are rarely the most comfortable places to sleep, because warmth is usually attached to work, and work is attached to rules. The kitchens, bakehouse, brewhouse, and other heat-heavy corners of the household are like glowing magnets in winter. They promise relief. They also promise trouble if you are caught where you do not belong. So moving toward warmth becomes a little game of risk and timing. The kitchen complex is the obvious heat engine. Ovens, hearths, boiling cauldrons, roasting spits, and hot water tasks fill the air with warmth and steam during active hours. Even when cooking ends, the masonry stays warmer than most of the castle for a while. You can feel it when you pass a kitchen wall, that faint, gentler temperature that makes your skin relax. It is hard not to drift closer. Your body wants it the way thirsty people want water, but the kitchen is a guarded world. Food is wealth. A sack of grain, a salted ham, a barrel of ale. These are not just ingredients. They are the household's security. So kitchens have strict oversight. Someone is always responsible, and blame falls easily. If a pie goes missing, someone will be accused, and the accused will likely be the person found sleeping nearby. That is why slipping into a warm kitchen corner is not just a comfort choice. It is a gamble with your reputation and your skin. A mainstream historical fact here is that medieval and early modern kitchens are central workplaces in large households, and often operate as complexes with separate areas for baking, brewing, and storage. Because supplying many people requires specialised work and constant fuel use, these spaces can remain warmer than living areas due to their fires and ovens. That makes them attractive for rest, especially for staff tied to those duties. So you look for in-between places. Not inside the main kitchen, but near it. A passage that shares a wall with the oven. A pantry corridor that catches residual warmth through masonry. A doorway recess outside the bakehouse where warm air leaks when someone enters. You do not want to be seen sprawled among pots like you are part of the inventory. You want plausible deniability. If someone asks why you are there, you can say you were waiting for instructions, checking supplies, or preparing for an early task. The bakehouse is particularly tempting. Large bread ovens retain heat for a long time. After baking, the oven's surrounding brickwork can stay warm into the night. Workers sometimes use that warmth for tasks like drying or warming utensils. That creates a window when a servant might curl near the outer wall, not so close as to get scolded, but close enough to feel like their bones are thawing. The smell is also comforting, that faint baked grain scent lingering in the air. It makes you feel like a person again, not just a set of hands. Then there is brewing. In many households, ale is a daily staple, and brewing involves hot water, boiling, and fermentation vessels that can keep an area warmer. The brewhouse can have a different kind of heat, wetter and heavier. Steam makes the air feel warm, but it also makes cloth damp, and dampness is a trap. So you learn that brewhouse warmth is a tease. It feels good while you're awake and moving. It can feel worse when you stop and your clothing cools. Still, the area might offer a short stretch of relief, especially if you can dry yourself briefly near a warm surface. Here is a quirky tidbit that shows how desperate people get. Some servants try to nap near laundry drying racks, or near linens that have been warmed and dried. Warm cloth radiates heat softly, and a pile of fresh dried fabric can be an accidental blanket treasure. Of course, that pile belongs to someone, and if you wrinkle it, dirty it, or leave it smelling like you will be scolded, so you might hover near it rather than touch it, using it as a warm wall of fabric rather than bedding. It is like sleeping next to a heater you're not allowed to hug. There are also forbidden corners that are warm for unpleasant reasons. The stable can be warmer than the stone corridors because animals generate heat, but stables are full of ammonia, damp straw, and the constant risk of being kicked. A servant might prefer it anyway if the alternative is a freezing hallway. You can sleep near animals only if you know them, and if you can keep clear of hooves. You learn to choose a spot where a horse cannot roll onto you, and where you will not wake to the feeling of straw in your mouth. Also, you accept the reality that you will smell like the stable afterward, which means everyone will know where you were. That can be its own punishment. Historians still argue about how often servants slept in workspaces versus having designated sleeping areas nearby, because regulations might forbid sleeping in kitchens for safety and discipline, while practical reality under cold conditions could push people to do it anyway. The tension between ideal order and lived improvisation is everywhere in household life. Rules exist. Cold exists. Humans choose which one to obey when nobody is looking, and nobody likes being caught. So servants develop stealthy routines. They time their rest when supervisors are least likely to appear. They choose spots that allow a quick exit. They keep their bedding minimal so they can look like they are resting briefly rather than fully sleeping. They might even sit upright with head tucked, pretending they are awake but quiet. If someone walks in, you can lift your head and look responsible. Even if your brain is still foggy, it is performance sleep. The castle loves performance. You also see that warmth can come with noise. Kitchens settle with pops and creaks. Barrels shift. Rats scuttle. A late worker might clatter a pot and wake you. So you learn to sleep lightly in these zones. You take the warmth, but keep your senses on a leash. The benefit is that if something goes wrong, a spark jumps, a pot tips, you might be nearby to respond. That usefulness can protect you from punishment. If you can say you were there to guard against fire or theft, you might even be thanked, quietly, very quietly. So you choose your warm corner like you are picking a seat in a dangerous theatre. You want heat, but not accusation. You want comfort, but not exposure. You want to be near work, but not in the way. You settle near a warm wall, you pull your cloak close, and you let the stored heat seep into you while it lasts. The castle does not offer warmth freely. It offers it attached to responsibility and risk. You accept the bargain, because winter does not negotiate. You begin to understand the line between uncomfortable and dangerous, and the castle teaches it with zero patience. Cold is not just a feeling, it is a slow theft of coordination, judgment, and circulation. Servants survive winter not only by finding warmth, but by recognizing when the body is slipping into trouble and acting before pride turns into tragedy. The first warning sign is numbness that does not bounce back. Fingers feel clumsy, like you're wearing invisible mittens. Toes lose sensation. Your face feels stiff. At first you shake it off and tell yourself it is normal. Then you notice you cannot tie a knot properly, or you fumble a latch, or you drop something for no reason. That is when cold becomes more than annoyance. It becomes hazard. A servant who cannot handle tools or keys is not just suffering. They are at risk of accidents in an inner castle. Accidents can be punished as negligence. Then comes shivering. Shivering is your body's engine revving to generate heat. It is helpful, but it burns energy. If you have not eaten enough, prolonged shivering drains you. And servants do not always have the luxury of extra calories. Food is controlled, portions are rationed. Sometimes you get a warm pottage, sometimes you get a crust and the knowledge that your stomach will have to develop character. When your body runs low on fuel, shivering can weaken, which is frightening because it looks like relief but is actually the body giving up its struggle. A mainstream historical fact that matters is that medieval and early modern people live with frequent respiratory illnesses and harsh winter conditions, and chronic cold exposure contributes to sickness risk and exhaustion, especially among the poor and those with heavy labour. People do not have antibiotics. They do not have modern insulation. Even minor illness can become serious when combined with cold, damp living conditions and relentless work. This is why the household survival strategies are not just comfort hacks. They are health strategies. You start noticing how dampness makes everything worse. Cold air is one thing, cold wet air is another. If your clothes are damp, your bedding is damp, or the floor is damp, your body loses heat faster. That can lead to chilled skin, cracked hands, and sores that are slow to heal. Servants often have hands that look older than their age. Rough and split from cold water and harsh work, those cracks can get infected. A small injury becomes a problem when you cannot rest. And then there is frostbite, which people may not name the way modern medicine does, but they recognize its signs: pale skin, hard feeling patches, burning pain when warmth returns, and lingering damage. Ears, fingers, toes, and nose are the classic targets. A servant in a bitter, drafty corridor might wake with painful, numb toes, and the urge is to warm them fast. But rapid warming can hurt, and if tissue is badly damaged, it can be dangerous. So people develop gentle warming habits, rubbing hands together, placing them near warmth without scorching, moving fingers to restore circulation. They learn caution because they have seen what happens when cold wins. Here's a quirky tidbit that reveals how people interpret illness. Many believe that cold drafts and chill can directly cause fevers, aches, and even long-term weakness, leading to practices like avoiding sleeping with an open mouth, covering the chest carefully, and keeping hair covered. Some of these habits are protective in a practical sense. Some are based on older medical theory about humours and balance. Either way, the result is a culture of managing exposure. A servant might be scolded for sleeping in a draft not only because it looks lazy, but because it is believed to invite sickness that reduces the household's labour capacity. When illness does strike, the castle's response is shaped by value. A highly skilled servant, a cook who knows recipes and timing, or a trusted porter with keys might receive more care. They might be allowed a warmer spot, given extra broth, or given a day of lighter duty if possible. A low-status worker might be told to push through until they drop. This is harsh, but it reflects the hierarchy of labour. The household invests in what it cannot easily replace. That truth can be painful, because it means your body's worth is evaluated like a tool. Historians still argue about how much formal medical care servants received in large households, because records can show payments for physicians or remedies, but they often focus on elites. Yet evidence also suggests that household medicine, simple remedies, and caregiving exist at multiple levels, especially when illness threatens the functioning of the entire establishment. A castle cannot afford for half its staff to be sick at once, so even basic care can be seen as practical maintenance. You also learn about the survival priority that sounds boring but saves lives. Eat and drink when you can. Warm liquid matters. Even plain broth or warmed ale gives your body heat and fuel. A servant might tuck away a small portion, not out of greed, but out of knowledge that midnight cold will demand energy. If you're on night duty, you might be given something warm as part of keeping you functional. It is not kindness, it is efficiency. Then there is movement. If you wake and feel dangerously cold, you do not stay still to prove toughness. You move gently. You flex hands and feet. You stand and walk a short loop. You do not sprint and sweat. Sweat is another trap. You aim for circulation without dampness. You learn the strange art of warming yourself without making yourself wetter. Socially, you also learn when to ask for help. Asking too often can label you weak. Asking too late can collapse you. So you choose moments. You mention numb fingers while doing a task, so it sounds like a work problem, not a comfort complaint. You ask to warm near a fire so you can handle the tools properly. You frame it as duty. The castle respects duty more than suffering. If you want relief, you make it sound like you're protecting the household. You also see the hidden danger of exhaustion. Broken sleep, cold, and labour combine into a fog that makes you make stupid choices. You might sit too close to a fire and singe your sleeve. You might fall asleep on watch. You might forget a latch. The castle punishes mistakes, and winter creates mistakes. This is why experienced servants look out for each other in a rough way. A sharp word, a shove, a forced cup of warm liquid. It can feel unkind, but it keeps people upright. So you treat the cold with respect. You monitor your body like a wary guardian. You notice the early signs of trouble and respond with small actions. Adjust layers, seek a calmer pocket, warm hands, eat something, move a little. You accept that winter in stone walls is not a romantic hardship, it is an ongoing risk, and the servants who survive are not the ones who pretend they are fine. They are the ones who learn the difference between discomfort and danger. Then act without drama, because drama wastes energy. You start noticing that the castle is not completely ignorant about warmth. It is not designed as a cosy cottage, obviously, but it also is not designed by someone who thinks humans are optional accessories. The building's first job is defense and status, but even defense architecture ends up making choices that affect temperature. When you live inside stone long enough, you learn where the structure helps you, even accidentally, and where it helps the important people on purpose. The thick walls are the first clue. They do not heat the space, but they slow change. A thick wall is like a big sponge for temperature. It absorbs warmth slowly and releases it slowly. That means interiors can be more stable than the outside air, especially in places shielded from wind. In a winter storm, the inside does not plunge instantly like a thin wooden hut might. It still gets cold, yes, but it is a slower cold. A cold with a delay. That delay can be the difference between discomfort and real danger. Windows tell the next part of the story. Castles tend to have small windows compared to later houses, especially in defensive areas. Less glass, less opening, less heat loss. Glass, when used, can be expensive and limited, and many openings rely on shutters or oiled cloth rather than large panes. Small windows also reduce drafts. You still get cold air creeping in, but it is easier to block a small gap than a huge one. This is a mainstream historical fact that lands plainly. Medieval and early modern castles often use smaller opening and shutters in many areas, partly for defence and partly because large glazed windows are not the default everywhere. The result is a building that leaks less air than you might expect from its dramatic look. You also notice the layout. Some castles include a kind of buffer space around entrances, gate passages, vestibules or layered doors. Multiple barriers slow invaders, but they also slow wind. A double door system can reduce the blast of cold air that would otherwise rush straight into the interior. Even a bend in the entry passage can help, because wind likes straight lines. If the corridor turns, the draft loses its sprint and becomes a tired shuffle. You quietly thank defensive paranoia for that small mercy. Then there are fireplaces and chimneys, which are not as simple as fire equals warm. A fireplace warms the people close to it more than the room as a whole, but it still matters. Fireplaces also create a controlled place for heat production, smoke removal and regular use. Chimneys pull smoke out, and their masonry warms. If several chimneys run through a building, certain walls can be subtly warmer, not hot, but less cold. It is like the castle has hidden veins of heat running through it, and you learn to stand near them the way a cat learns to find a sunbeam. Now, not every castle has the same heating upgrades. Some places add features over time. Later medieval and early modern settings can include more fireplaces, improved chimneys, and private heated chambers for elites. You feel that evolution in the way some rooms are designed to close off better, with tighter doors and more controlled airflow, even when servants do not get those rooms. The building's heat choices ripple outward. Warmth always leaks somewhere, and you learn to position yourself where that leak is most helpful. You also notice how interiors are dressed. Walls may be hung with textiles, not everywhere, but in key spaces. Floors may have rushes or coverings. Doors may have curtains. These elements are not structural, but they are part of the building's lived design. They reduce drafts, soften cold surfaces, and make the air less aggressive. A tapestry is not just a picture. It is a portable wall that traps a layer of still air. If you have ever wrapped yourself in a blanket and felt instantly safer, you already understand the principle. Here is a quirky tidbit that makes you smirk. Some castle corridors and rooms can feel warmer simply because of human traffic. A busy passage where people move constantly can be slightly less cold than a forgotten one. Not because bodies are heaters in any dramatic sense, but because doors are opened and closed, torches burn, and activity concentrates in certain zones. It is like the castle has social warmth, and the places where people matter become a little more livable. You might tell yourself the hallway is warmer because it likes you. It does not. It just likes the people with authority. Still, you take the benefit. You also learn that ceiling height matters. Great halls can be massive and hard to heat, because warm air rises and hangs out near the rafters, like it is attending a private party. Smaller rooms can hold warmth better because there is less volume to fill. That is one reason private chambers, closets, and alcoves can feel more tolerable even with the same fire size. The geometry itself is a tool. A low ceiling is not glamorous, but it is efficient. Honestly, if castles were designed by modern energy auditors, they would be 5 feet tall and everyone would crawl. The fashion would be terrible, but the heating bill would slap. You start looking at stair placement and internal courtyards too. Some castles are arranged around a courtyard, and rooms facing inward can be more sheltered from wind than rooms facing outward. Internal corridors can be calmer than external wall walks. The building creates layers, outside, then defences, then inner spaces. Each layer cuts wind and damp a bit. You're basically living inside an onion made of stone, and yes, it can still make you cry. Historians still argue whether castle builders consciously prioritised comfort features for general living, or whether comfort improvements mostly appear as later adaptations driven by elite expectations rather than original intent. Some features that help with warmth might be deliberate for high-status rooms. Others might be incidental results of defensive choices. Either way, what you experience is a blend of purpose and side effect. And there are limits that the building cannot hide. Stone is cold, moisture creeps, wind finds cracks. A castle is not sealed like a modern house, so the design helps, but it does not rescue you. It gives you opportunities. It gives you slightly better pockets, slightly calmer corridors, slightly less punishing corners. It gives you a structure you can read, like a map that highlights where survival is easier. So you walk through the castle not as a visitor admiring architecture, but as a living thermometer. You notice where walls feel less icy, where air is less sharp, where door systems break drafts, where small windows leak less, where chimneys run like warm spines through the stone. You realise the castle is not a single temperature. It is a patchwork. And in that patchwork, the difference between a cruel night and a manageable one can be as small as a corner, a curtain, a thicker wall, or a doorway built with the kind of caution that accidentally saves your fingers. You start noticing something funny about castles and the stories people tell about them. The colder and more dramatic the place, the more confident everyone becomes about how it worked. People will look at a stone corridor and announce, like they personally filed the paperwork. Servants slept right there on the floor every night. It sounds neat and brutal and cinematic. It also compresses a messy reality into one tidy image. The historical equivalent of putting a complicated meal into a blender and calling it soup. So you do what any sensible person does when faced with confident nonsense. You get curious, you start sorting what is solid fact, what is likely, what is exaggerated, and what is flat-out myth that refuses to die because it looks good on camera. Here is the mainstream historical fact that anchors everything. Most detailed surviving descriptions of elite households focus on the routines, spaces, and goods of the higher status people, while lower status living conditions often appear indirectly through rules, complaints, payments, inventories, or architectural hints rather than personal diaries saying, "Hello, I am freezing in a corridor." That imbalance shapes what you can prove. It is not that servants are invisible because they did not exist. It is that the record keeping tends to spotlight the people with money, power, and literacy. So whenever someone speaks with absolute certainty about exactly where every servant slept, your inner alarm should gently beep. Now you examine the classic myth, the idea that medieval castles are always icy inside. They are cold, yes, but always icy is too simple. Thick walls can stabilise temperature, sheltered inner rooms can be calmer, busy areas can retain a little warmth. The real problem is unevenness. Warmth is local and leaky, not evenly distributed. So some spaces can feel manageable, while others are punishing. When someone says castles are freezing, they're often picturing the worst corridor on the windiest night, which is a bit like judging all restaurants by the one sandwich you dropped on the sidewalk. Then there is the myth of constant corridor sleeping. Sometimes servants do sleep in halls or passages, especially when the household is crowded or when servants must be near duty. But in many cases, there are also dormitory-like spaces, lofts, attics, side chambers, gate lodges, and rooms attached to work areas. The variety is the point. Some castles evolve over time, adding service quarters and specialised spaces. Some households are well organised, some are chaotic, some are wealthy enough to plan, some are just surviving. Historians still argue whether the hallway sleeper image is representative of everyday routine across places and centuries, or whether it is an overemphasised snapshot drawn from crowded moments, moral complaints, and dramatic retellings. You also notice how myths grow from real things. For example, the idea of servants sleeping wherever they drop can come from the reality of rotating duties and opportunistic rest. People do sleep in awkward places when work demands it. A guard might doze near a gate, a kitchen worker might rest near a warm wall, a messenger might collapse in a corner. Those moments happen. Over time, the story becomes, they always slept in hallways, because sometimes is boring and always is punchy. Human brains love punchy. Now you start interrogating the sources you would have if you were doing this academically, but you keep it in your hands and feet because you are living it in your imagination. You consider household ordinances, which sometimes tell servants where they should sleep or warn them not to sleep in certain places, but rules are tricky evidence. A rule often exists because someone is already doing the forbidden thing. If an ordinance says stop lounging by the fire, it suggests people like warmth and keep doing it. Shocking. I know. Next you will tell me people also like food. You consider architecture too. If a castle has a clear service wing, narrow passages, and rooms that look like communal quarters, that suggests organised sleeping space. If it has only grand rooms and few obvious servant areas, that does not automatically prove servants slept in corridors, because spaces can be repurposed, altered, or lost. Buildings change, walls get added, floors get rebuilt. The castle you see today might not reflect the castle's exact interior arrangement in a specific year. Stone feels eternal. but human renovations are sneaky. Then there is the issue of region and period. A fortress in one country in the 13th century is not the same as a residence with defensive features in the 17th. Household size, building style, fuel availability, and social norms shift. You can be right about one castle and wrong about another. This is why historians sound cautious, not because they are afraid of fun, but because the past refuses to be uniform. Now for a quirky tidbit that helps you understand how stories warp. There are occasional references in literature and anecdote to servants sleeping in absurdly cramped or hidden spots, like under stairs, in passage recesses, or tucked behind hangings, sometimes to avoid drafts and sometimes to avoid being seen. These scenes can be real, exaggerated, or used as symbolism about low-status life. The tricky part is that even if one account is true, it does not automatically scale up into everyone did this always, but it does reveal something important. Servants are often expected to be present but not visible, which makes hidden sleeping spots feel plausible in certain contexts. Also, if you ever want to feel like a ghost, try living as essential but unseen. It is a great way to develop a strong opinion about architecture and a weak opinion about humanity. You also run into the debate about health and bad air. People in the past often fear drafts and night air as causes of illness. Modern readers sometimes laugh at this, but you can see how a drafty sleeping spot plus damp clothing plus exhaustion leads to sickness. The explanation may be different, but the observed pattern is not entirely wrong. So when a source complains about servants sleeping in drafts, it might be moralizing, medical, practical, or all three. The complaint itself is evidence of concern, not a precise map of sleeping arrangements. Another myth pops up. The idea that everyone used piles of filthy straw and nothing else. Straw is common, yes, but textiles matter too. Wool exists across classes. Cloaks, rough blankets, and worn linens are part of daily life. The quality differs hugely, but the materials are not imaginary. Bedding can be humble and still functional. People are not helpless. They innovate, they layer, they block drafts, they share warmth. They do what humans do when confronted with weather. They complain, then they problem solve, then they complain again for fun, and you notice something else. Popular images of castle life often focus on suffering as entertainment, like discomfort is the only proof that the past was real. But real past life includes organisation, routine, and skill. Servants do not survive by being passive victims of stone. They survive by learning techniques and habits. That part is less glamorous, so it gets edited out. It is like watching a sports highlight reel and concluding the entire game is just people screaming and throwing themselves through the air. The boring parts are actually the structure that makes the highlights possible. So where does this leave you? It leaves you with a more interesting picture than the simple myths. You accept that the record is uneven, you accept variation, you accept that household rules, building design, and lived improvisation all shape where and how servants sleep. You accept that hallway sleeping is sometimes true, sometimes not, and often more complicated than a single dramatic image. And you feel the quiet satisfaction of reality. It is colder, messier, and more human than myth, which means it is also funnier. Because humans will always find a way to argue about who gets the warmest corner. Even when the corner is still cold enough to chill your soul, you settle into that thought with a sleepy grin, because if you can laugh at the castle's nonsense, the castle loses a tiny bit of power. You make it to the deepest part of the night, when the castle feels like it is holding its breath. The corridors are quieter, the air is heavier, and the cold has settled into everything with the confidence of a guest who refuses to leave. This is the hour when your choices add up. Not one trick, not one lucky corner, but a full routine that turns survival into something almost ordinary. You begin with a final check of your body because winter punishes denial. Fingers move, toes wiggle. If anything feels too numb, you do not pretend it is fine. You flex slowly, restoring circulation without sweating. You adjust layers so nothing is damp against skin. You pull fabric into place and make sure no draft is sliding into a gap at your neck or waist. Then you choose your spot with the practical eye of someone who has learned the castle's moods. You avoid straight wind lanes. You avoid door cracks. You favour a calm pocket where the air sits still. Your bedding becomes a deliberate build. not a messy pile. You place insulation under your core because your core is your heat engine. You make sure the floor is not directly stealing warmth through thin fabric. You arrange a barrier so low drafts do not rake your ankles. You make a small nest shape, compact enough to keep warmth close. Then you add your clothing layer by layer, not overthinking, just following the logic your body already understands. Cap on, neck wrap secure, wool, close, outer layer positioned to block moving air. You keep your feet wrapped, because toes are dramatic and will file a complaint before the rest of you realizes there is a problem. If you have a warmed object, you use it carefully, wrapped and placed where it helps most. If you do not, you use what you have. Sometimes that is simply a better tuck of cloth, a tighter seal around edges, or a shift in posture that reduces exposed surface. You settle in with a slight curl, not because it is cute, but because it minimizes heat loss. You keep your hands close to your body, tucked where blood stays warmer. You let your breathing slow, because calm breathing conserves energy. And then you join the human part of the routine, the part that no stone wall can replace. You align with others if that is allowed and safe. You keep your body close enough to benefit from shared warmth while respecting boundaries. You place yourself so you are not in the path of constant foot traffic. You accept that someone will snore, someone will mutter, someone will shift like they are wrestling a blanket. You do not waste energy being annoyed. You treat it like weather. It exists, you adapt. Also, if you ever want a free concert, just sleep near someone who snores in 3 separate keys. Truly groundbreaking stuff. A mainstream historical fact that grounds this final routine is that large households rely on servants for continuous operation, including night duties and early morning tasks, and that reality shapes where and how staff rest, often in communal or near-duty locations rather than private heated rooms. Sleep is integrated into labour. That is why survival strategies are not luxuries. They are part of working life. You keep one last thing in mind: readiness. You might be woken for a knock, a cry, a fire alarm, a gate issue, a sick animal, a noble demand that feels urgent because someone had a bad dream. So you position your shoes and cloak where you can grab them quickly. You do not bury your footwear under a pile. You do not tie yourself into a fabric trap you cannot escape. You sleep in a way that allows you to rise without panic. If you can stand up fast, you can move to warmth fast. You can also look competent, which in a castle is its own form of protection. Historians still argue about the precise balance between formal household management and improvised survival habits, because some settings show structured arrangements while others suggest flexible adaptation. But the knight does not care about paperwork. It cares about physics and bodies. Your routine respects both. It is not pretty. It is effective. Now, the hours creep toward dawn. The cold does its last slow push, trying to seep through seams, trying to convince your body that sleep is a mistake. But your little system holds. You stay compact. You keep drafts out. You keep extremities covered. You share warmth if you can. You take rest in the way the castle allows. Not perfect, but enough. You begin to sense the first changes of morning before you see them. A distant shuffle, a quiet cough, the faint clink of metal, the whisper of someone rising to tend embers. The castle's heart begins to beat again. You smell smoke as a fire is coaxed back to life. That smell is the promise of heat, of hot liquid, of hands that can function again. Your eyes open slowly, not because you are refreshed, but because you are trained. You sit up, feeling the stiffness in your joints, the ache in your back, the crackle of cold air against your face. You flex fingers. You press feet into whatever wrapping you managed. You take a breath and let the air fill your chest without rushing. Then you stand carefully, because standing too fast when you're cold can make you dizzy and clumsy. And clumsy in a castle is how you end up making noise at the wrong time and becoming the day's entertainment. You gather your things with the efficiency of someone who knows they might need them again tonight. You shake out straw from your cloak. You fold cloth back into place. You glance at the corridor, which looks exactly as cold as it did hours ago, because stone does not care about your feelings. Still, you have made it. Not by luck, but by technique. You have survived a winter night in a place that offers little warmth and even less privacy. You have done it without a modern heater, without electric light, without a bed that remembers your body, just with layers, positioning, shared heat, and an understanding of how cold moves. And as morning fully arrives, you feel a strange pride, not heroic pride, not cinematic pride, but the quiet pride of endurance. You are still here. Your fingers work. Your toes exist. Your body may be tired, but it is alive. The castle wakes around you and demands labour again. As if your night was a minor detail, you shrug internally, because you have learned the castle's rules. It does not reward you, it uses you. So you reward yourself with a small private joke. You have spent the night sleeping with straw, cloth, and maybe a brick, and yet somehow you are still the most advanced heating system this corridor has ever known. Now the pace begins to slow, the sounds soften. Your steps become gentler. You let the cold image fade into something calmer, like fog lifting off stone. You imagine warmth returning gradually, not as a sudden blast, but as a steady, kindling glow. You picture hands wrapped around a cup, steam rising, breath no longer sharp. You let your shoulders loosen, you let your jaw unclench, you let your mind stop scanning for drafts and duties. You're safe in this moment. You're warm enough. The castle's night is behind you like a closed door, and the day, for all its work, has light in it. Your breathing is slow and even. Your thoughts drift like ash settling. The stone corridors quiet in your imagination, becoming distant, becoming soft around the edges, as if the whole place is turning into a harmless memory made of grey silhouettes and gentle torchlight. Let your eyes rest. Let your body rest. Let the idea of cold become smaller and smaller, until it is just a story you listened to while you got sleepy. Your room right now is yours. Your blanket is yours. Your night is gentle. And whatever castle you wandered through in your mind can stay there. Far away. Sealed behind thick walls that no longer matter. End of script. Sweet dreams.